Welcome everyone. Billy Alcoholic. Sorry, we're like a minute late, but I'm waiting for like an arc with two of each animal to float by because it has not stopped raining for like 6 hours where I live. Like 5 hours of straight rain, pool overflowing, whatever. First world problems for sure, but all right. So welcome everyone. I would remind everyone, in case you don't know, or you forgot, or no one reminded you, that today is a significant day in AA history. It's May 12th, means that 90 years ago today, Bill met Bob for the first time. May 12th, 1935 was Mother's Day, was a Sunday. Just like yesterday was Mother's Day. But that meeting happened today, 90 years ago. We're all here tonight. And the course of history regarding alcoholism and alcoholics was changed like more than it had ever been changed ever before, and still is. And that's why what we have here is important. So I just do want to go over just the schedule for everyone so that everyone, if you haven't looked at it in a while, let me just pull it up and I will just so tonight is Concept 8 and Tradition 8. The 19th is Tradition 9 and Concept 9. And then May 26th, the last Monday of May, we switch to a pamphlet, and this time it'll be Problems Other Than Alcohol. So again, next week, Tradition 9 and Concept 9. The week after that will be Problems Other Than Alcohol. So we're on Tradition 8 tonight. I am going to read the long form. Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional. We define professionalism as the occupation of counseling alcoholics for fees or hire. But we may employ alcoholics where they're going to perform those certain services for which we might otherwise have to engage non-alcoholics. Such special services may be well recompensed, but our usual AA 12-step work is never to be paid for. This is one of those things where the language used in today's world, especially because of the last sentence, can sometimes make you not a popular person in an AA meeting or in your local community, which is fine. But that line, but our usual AA 12-step work is never paid for, if I just start there, I don't know about where any of you live, but in certain places of the country, there are places, and like part of their like mission statement is, we're not a treatment center, we just take people through the steps. We're just a facility that houses people and puts people through the steps, and that's all well and good. It's just not AA. 12-step work is never to be paid for, ever. And this is where you can get, the modern world is very different than the world of 1946 or even 1935. 90 years ago today, Bill met Bob. That means that 90 years ago and 6 months ago today, actually, the 12th, it's very funny that May 12th was Mother's Day in 1935, because December 12th is the night of Bill W.'s spiritual experience in Towns Hospital. So 6 months later, he meets Bob. But when Bill left Towns Hospital, AA didn't look like it did today, first of all, because AA didn't exist. So that's number one. There was no AA. But there were also not a lot of other things, like there were no life coaches. in December of 1934. There were no sobriety coaches. We didn't have them in 1934 either. We have all these things in the world today that didn't exist for a long time. And if you're an AA member engaged in those activities, you're supposed to be able to separate your AA activity from that activity. So if the job of one of those coaches is just to like live with somebody, wake them up, tell them to go to a meeting, travel with them, maybe that's a valid job. I don't know. I've never done it, and I've never had a sober coach. But if it's to like sponsor somebody or take somebody through the steps, the way I read this tradition, it's not okay. Like you can't be paid for taking someone through the steps. That is part of 12-step work. But again, the world is very different today. It's funny because obviously those things cost money. But I'm just going to share my personal experience with one, I guess you would call A-list celebrity, is how they would be best be described. My own personal experience in AA with one A-list celebrity. Obviously, his experience is not the same as every other person. In his, there are other men and women that are A-list celebrities like him, and maybe they don't have the same experience. But I can tell you his experience. Every time he tried to buy sobriety, he didn't stay sober. That's number one. Number two, when he would try to go to meetings and like pull a baseball hat over his eyes or keep his hood up, sit in the back of the room, he didn't get sober. When he did get sober, he sat in the front of the room, didn't care who saw him because his life was on the line, took a commitment as a greeter, took a commitment as the literature table person. When he had 6 months, took a commitment as chairing a meeting. Like, these are his words, not mine. Until he was willing to do the things that every ordinary person in AA has to do, he couldn't get sober. That was his experience. I also want to pass on his experience about travel, which I find very interesting. Because again, that occupation of sober coach, life coach, and traveling with people, if there's non-AA activities involved in it, that's great. But I'm just going to tell you his experience that he relayed to me. When he had a paid person like that, and he was going on some trip to film, that person would chart out all his meetings and where meetings were and where the local clubhouse was and what days of the week and time. His experience passed on to me is he told me that didn't work for him. You know what worked for him? A sponsor telling him to get the goddamn phone number of the local intergroup and call them himself. That's what worked for him. A sponsor, he told me, a sponsor who finally told him, I'm not going to tell you where to go. Like, you need to do what everybody else does. There was no meeting guide app at that time, but you could go on Google and you could Google that city in an intergroup and you could pull up their website. And most intergroup websites at that time had a meeting directory page, and it would say, click here. It was the old website interface. So it would say, click here for a PDF downloadable meeting schedule, right? But he told me, until he printed themselves out on his own, Until he took responsibility for his own sobriety, he never got sober. And so his lesson to me, and listen, I am the first person to know that people with a little bit of personal notoriety have a hard time in Alcoholics Anonymous, not because of themselves, because of us, because we can't help ourselves. Like, I was in Tennessee on a podium waiting for the meeting to start. I was on the podium facing the crowd, because I was speaking when the meeting started, so I could see the crowd. I saw an A-list celebrity in Tennessee in like the fourth row. You know what I also saw? Somebody go up and ask them for her autograph. Like, why would we do that? Like, why can't we just treat the person like a fellow member of Alcoholics Anonymous? You know, I myself have a brother who is sober, who has 6 Emmys, right, for TV producing. Like, I know that when he was originally getting sober, certain meetings he would go to, people in the so-called industry, and if you ever spend time in New York or California, you know about the industry. Um, they would wait for him with like a show idea or a script. And so I don't want to sound like, like I understand that probably some of these sober coaches and stuff, they can, there's probably a viable service as long as it's not doing the 12-step work. But I also know that there's a hard responsibility on all of us to treat every AA member as if they're only the same. I was glad to see not too many weeks ago, right after the election, like end of December until early February, there was somebody very well known, um, government official type. And I go to a men's meeting on Sunday morning, and every Sunday morning, I saw 2 SUVs pull in that parking lot. And one would go to the back, and I saw this gentleman get out of the other. And you know what I loved about it? He got out. He had a bottle of water usually. He went and got a cup of coffee. He sat down in the front row. When they said, is anyone visiting from out of town? He raised his hand and said, my name is so-and-so. I'm visiting from this place. My home group is this. Like, he was just a regular, ordinary AA member. And I was even there one week when, after the meeting, of course, somebody couldn't help themselves and brought up a topic to him as he was walking out. And he just politely said, I don't talk about that here. That's not why I'm here. But so I don't want to say like I'm callous, like I don't believe that these people, sometimes have a harder challenge. So the beginning of the eighth tradition, we define professionalism as the occupation of counseling for fees or hire. So counseling is an interesting word because in most states you need a license, right? You used to be called a certified alcoholism counselor and then certified alcoholism and drug dependence counselor. But counseling was a profession. Now, when I got sober and when I came into AA as a teenager, there weren't a lot of treatment centers like there are today. There were like rest and relaxation homes. There was a place where I grew up called Charlie Murphy's. Some of you might have heard of it if you're from New York or Long Island. But most of the people who you met in the 80s who worked in treatment, most of them were on their second career. They were 30 or so years sober, retired from some job, and they got certified, and this is how they spent some of their retirement. Today, it's not even about counseling for fee or for hire. We have a lot of other titles in the outside world that have invaded us. We have Peer support specialists. I've seen that on a business card. A lot of peer support specialists. A lot of, like, I have people who call me and say, Billy, you're not going to believe this. I just got offered a job and I get to be doing service at the same time. And I will ask them, what are you talking about? Oh, well, I just talked to the guy. The greatest thing about this job is I'll get paid to be a therapy aide at this treatment center and I'll be doing service at the same time. So when it comes to, this line of defining professionalism as counseling for alcoholics for fee or for hire, the first thing to really remember when it comes to the eighth tradition is it's impossible to be an AA member doing AA 12-step work while you're being paid. Impossible. It doesn't matter what job you have. You might be an AA member in your regular life, but you can't do both at the same time. But we have a lot of that. I try to warn people not to do that because it's such a trap. And I'm a guy who has great respect and even empathy, because I can tell you at one of the men's meetings that I go to, we get a lot of young men who are returning to AA, counting days, who are either still working in treatment or burnt out working in treatment. Like, we need to do a better job of that, of watching out for people who work in that industry, not labeling them or anything else, but actually reaching out our hand. Because I can't even imagine what it's like when your job is for 8 hours a day to put up with people like me. Could you imagine that? Like, I will burn you out. If you are working with me 8 hours a day and putting up with me, I couldn't even imagine. Your job is to deal with me for 8 hours. Are you going to want to go to an AA meeting that night after dealing with me all day? I don't think so. Like, I totally get what goes on there. And I'm totally respectful of the low percentage of recovery in professionals. And we should do a better job of that, of helping these people be regular members of Alcoholics Anonymous. It then says we may employ alcoholics where they're going to perform those services where we might have to otherwise engage a non-alcoholic. Now, if you read AA Comes of Age, you hear of Tom the fireman. Tom the fireman got sober at the Rockland County Psychiatric Center, first place there was ever an H&I kind of treatment meeting. And he was a janitor at the 23rd Street Clubhouse, except he was more like an indentured servant than a janitor, because he didn't get paid and he was just expected to do all this work. But it was beyond like cleaning the coffee pot and like putting away some chairs. He was actually acting as a janitor. And the stories in AA Comes of Age, where, he finally had to say something to Bill W. and they finally changed that. They paid him to be a janitor. Just because he was an alcoholic doesn't mean he shouldn't be paid to do that job. And if you look at our general service structure, or even your inner group, I'll talk about general service first, meaning the AA World Service employees at the General Service Office or the AA Grapevine employees at the General Service Office. Some of them don't have to be alcoholic. They just need a skill. They need a skill that we need. Maybe we need an IT director. Maybe we need a translator. Maybe we need an editor. Maybe we need someone who knows accounts payable. Maybe we need a CFO or a controller. But we also have some jobs where you need some of those skills, but you also need to be an alcoholic. Like if you look at AA World Services, the general manager, the director of staff services, and the director of AA publishing are all required to be an alcoholic. However, there are other skills that they need. Being an alcoholic is just one of the requirements. The AA staff desks, treatment, group services, corrections, regional forums and international conventions, cooperating with the professional community, language services, around 12 of them. They all have to be alcoholic as well. But they need other special skills. If you get on average of 600 emails a month, it seems that having to have the ability to respond to an email doesn't sound out of line. Like you need that special skill set. You need the ability to communicate. So it's super important. Now at the Grapevine, the executive editor publisher has to be an alcoholic. The senior editor, John, he's an alcoholic, or the managing editor, John, he's an alcoholic. Paola, who's the editor of Lavinia, she's an alcoholic. But you see, they're not paid for being an alcoholic. They're paid to do their job, and being an alcoholic is just one requirement. That being an AA member is a requirement for that job. Now, here's the part. Well, let me just talk about intergroups. If you call 212-870-3400, I used to call that number 100 times a week when I was on the board. But if you call that number on a weekend when the office is closed and you say you're an alcoholic and you listen to the voicemail, it'll say, if you're looking for help, please call New York Intergroup. If you get one of the staff desks during the week and you're an alcoholic looking for help, they might help you quickly. But if you need a lot of help looking for meetings, they're going to send you to New York Intergroup because they don't want to be paid for 12-step work at all. They don't want to be paid for it. There's a man who used to be the executive secretary of New York Intergroup, Bob R. Great, great man. But he used to say that between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., he doesn't answer the hotline at Intergroup. That's the volunteer's job. The volunteer's job is to help the alcoholic reaching out for help. His job was to schedule the volunteers. His job was to order the literature, make the committee meeting schedule, do all kinds of office things. Now, the difficult part about this tradition is this sentence. Such services may be well recompensed because we become cheap when we get sober. And, you know, I was a young person sober, you know. I want the cool sneakers at the time, the cool jeans, 2 packs of Newports. And I'm going to tell you, I don't have money to get into your young people's dance, right? That's the mentality, right? That's just how it comes, right? But I hear people say such horrible things about paying our employees. It says here, well recompensed. That means well paid. And I can tell you, a couple of things happen when we're not willing to pay a fair wage. And most of the time, I get drawn into questions about intergroups. At the General Service Office in the Grapevine, we have a pay schedule. We do compensation studies every 3 years. We make sure that people who are doing the same thing at other nonprofits get paid the same as us. You know, that we're not too high and too low. But if you don't pay someone adequately to do a job, number one, you're never going to get good employees. That's number one. It's not good for the fellowship. I'll tell you what happens when you don't pay someone adequately, especially in intergroups. They start to feel like they should get paid somewhere else or somehow else. And I'm not talking about like taking $1 for every big book that's sold. I'm talking about in their authority at the office. Like, I've heard an in-a-group manager say to me a long time ago, yeah, they hardly pay me anything, so I should be able to say what goes on around here. And that's just not the truth. Being an AA special worker is a difficult position because you're always going to report. Your bosses eventually are always going to be volunteer trusted servants. The executive editor publisher of the Grapevine's boss is the Grapevine board, which is made up of volunteer trusted servants. The general manager of GSO, Bob W., his boss is the AAWS board and the general service board. I remember one time, it's just when I was elected the first time, I was chair of the AA World Services Board. When you're chair of the AWS board, you fly into the board meeting a day early so that you can meet with the general manager. Because while you're not the boss of the general manager, you are the representative of his bosses. You're the chair of that volunteer trusted servant board. And I remember the first time I walked into that office to have that meeting. And I remember being a little blown away, like, wow, like this general manager is a legend to me in AA service. Like I knew them when they were a delegate and a trustee and now general manager. And now I'm there as the representative of their boss, but that's how our structure works. No paid employee is ever the final authority. It's in an intergroup, it would be usually the intergroup body, and some intergroups will have a steering committee. But it's so important that we treat our employees well, that we treat them like they would be paid at another non-for-profit. If that means getting them a retirement plan or medical insurance. And I know people say, oh my God, it's going to cost so much money. Well, wait a minute. How many of us are saying that who have medical insurance, who have a 401k or a pension where we work? I've actually seen some disgusting behavior at regional forums where, unfortunately, the law is when you file your 990 as a nonprofit, you have to list your 5 highest paid employees. And since nonprofit tax returns are public, people can get them. And I hear people say such outrageous things about what people make at the general service office in the AA Grapevine. And I wonder if they'd like if someone else called out their salary. Like, should I get up to the podium and call out your salary, whatever job you have? Should I get to tell everyone what you make? Do you really need to do that? And the other thing is, New York City, like California and some other places, is not a cheap place to live. Most of the people who take a job at the general service office don't take a big pay increase. They either made a lateral move, and most general managers took a pay cut. Most executive editors of the Grapevine took a pay cut from wherever they came. They do it out of a sense of duty. But, people hear $100,000 and they think it's $1 million. I'm just here to tell you that living in New York City, just Google what's the rent for a studio apartment in Manhattan. Just Google that. And then you can tell me that people are getting paid a lot of money, but we really have to be fair with our employees, and the tradition tells us to do that. So that's enough of that. I'm going to go to concept 8. If you remember when we talked about concept 6, I said that concept 8 is the opposite. So I'll just read concept 6 first for a second. The first part. On behalf of the AA as a whole, the General Service Conference has the principal responsibility of maintaining our world services, and it traditionally has the final decision regarding large matters of general policy and finance. The conference is responsible for large matters of policy and finance. So what does concept 8 tell us? It has two parts. The trustees of the General Service Board act in two primary capacities. Number one, with respect to large matters of overall policy and finance, they're the principal planners and administrators. They and their primary committees directly manage these affairs. So concept 6 says the conference owns large matters of policy and finance. And concept 6, you have to remember the conference means the whole conference, all 137 of them, not just the area delegates, but the staff, the directors, and the trustees. That's who has the final responsibility for large matters of policy and finance. Now, what is the trustees' responsibility? Well, it says here, with respect to the large matters of overall policy and finance, they don't have the final decision. They're the planners and the administrators and the managers. They plan, administrate, and manage. Sometimes people think that the General Service Conference is kind of the end of the conference year. That's how we look at it. And from an area perspective, as a GSR or a DCM or an area officer, it kind of is the end of the conference year. Your delegate came back from last year, told you what the conference voted on. Then you did your business all year. And then in February, your delegate got the agenda for the new conference. And in your area, somehow you come up with a way, however your area does it, of giving your delegate feedback about the conference agenda items. That's kind of like the culmination. But when you're a member of the board, of the Grapevine Board, the AWS Board, or the General Service Board, the conference is really the start of the year. That's where you get your instructions. See, the conference votes on these large matters of policy and finance. And then for the next 365 days, it's the board's job to administer, plan, and manage all these things. And then at the next conference, let the conference know how they're going or any updates. It says B, but with respect to our separately incorporated and constantly active services, the relation of the trustees is mainly that of a full stock ownership of custodial oversight, which they exercise through their ability to elect all directors of these entities. So it gets confusing, the legal and the spiritual. When the concept was written, this was true, legally and spiritually. The General Service Board owned AA World Services and AA Grapevine, Inc. And that's what it says. The relation of the trustee is mainly that of full stock ownership. Now, when we got a certain size in the 60s and had to create a pension program and had to have a reserve fund, those corporations were made membership corporations. So no longer subsidiaries, but affiliates. So legally, the General Service Board doesn't own the stock of AA Grapevine or AA World Services anymore. Legally. Spiritually, they do for sure. Legally, they're three independent companies. The owners, the legal owners now, are the 21 people who are trustees. That 21 or 22 people own AWS, they own AA Grapevine, and they own the General Service Board. Now, you can't take it with you when you rotate out. So whatever rich you are, you think you got your 121st slice of pie, it goes away when you leave, okay? But what is this custodial oversight? Number one, I want to stress the word custodian and custodial. I've said before, I love the Spanish word that the Spanish community uses for trustee, which is custodio. Because sometimes we are all so hyped up about doing AA service that we want to do the best job ever. We want to be the best cookie person that the Easy Does It group ever had. We want to be the best anniversary cake person the One Day at a Time group ever had. We want to be the greatest delegate in the history of the world. We want to be the best trustee ever. I get it. But the true meaning of a custodian is to return something in the condition it was given to you. That's your number one responsibility. You don't have to return it better, but don't return it worse. You may make some improvements, and that's great, but don't be so blinded by making. A lot of times in AA service, we get into this thing called legacy building. We really want to have our name on something. We want to know that 10 years later, when somebody is talking about the plain language big book, they're going to know that I was responsible for that, right? Or I was responsible for the new preamble, or I wrote this thing, or whatever. It's all a bunch of BS. Legacy building does nothing good in Alcoholics Anonymous. Returning something in the condition, whether it's your inner group or your group treasury or your district or your area, returning it in the same condition it was given to you and not making it worse is your number one responsibility. Now, they say they carry out these custodial oversight by electing the directors. Yes, 9 directors on AA World Services, 9 directors on AA Grapevine Board. 4 at least by the bylaws have to be trustees. So that's how the trustees keep kind of a watch. They don't legally own it anymore, but at least 4 trustees have to be directors on both of these boards. On the Grapevine, they have 5 trustees who are directors. And then there are non-trustee directors and staff or employee directors. But the trustees and the trustees nominating committee elects and selects these people. And their job, remember, at the end of the day, we're a $40 million a year company, give or take the reserve fund, the pension fund, our annual responsibility, our annual budget for the Grapevine and AA World Services. And, you know, later on in the concepts, I'll get to it, it says we select the best people. You know, everybody wants to do every job sometimes, but we need the best people. And those businesses are real businesses. And the trustees and the directors' number one responsibility is the ordinary and regular business of those corporations. Not writing a new pamphlet, not writing a new preamble. That should come from the fellowship. The board's job is really the day-to-day management of the 3 corporate entities, the 3 businesses. Now, concept 8 has a little bit of a loophole, if you want to call it, or I should say an exception, as to when the trustees should not only have custodial oversight. Custodial oversight means I've been on the nominating committee. I've been the chair of the trustees nominating committee. Custodial oversight means we just elected this person to do this, and I should be able to walk away and not micromanage. We find that difficult in AA. We love to fix, manage, and control almost more than Al-Anons, right? Like we can't help ourselves, right? We want to micromanage everything. But when we elect somebody, it's so funny because I just got something. I was just looking at it. It's so hilarious. The GSO quarterly reports, I finally got a collection of all of them. And I was looking at let's see, November 2008, believe it or not. Look at this. November 2008, report from GSO. The old kind of church bulletin type, refold out. You probably all remember them. But November of 2008, here's a little read. The committee recommended to the General Service Board that Andrea B. and William N. serve as non-trustee directors on the AA World Services Corporate Board following the 2009 conference. Me. That's me. Like, I was elected by those trustees who are carrying out their custodial oversight. And so they're not supposed to be micromanaging me. We're supposed to let AAWS and the AA Grapevine do their job. But there's two exceptions inside the concept. The first is except to mediate difficult situations and to see that the service corporations operate within their budgets and within general timeframes, the work of the AA headquarters policy. So when it says mediate difficult situations, yes, there are times in our history when AA World Services and AA Grapevine maybe weren't cooperating like they should be. You know, somebody told me a long time ago, a past trustee, has made a lot of sense to me. And it's a sports analogy. That the name on the front of the jersey is 100 times more important than the name on the back. I love that analogy. The team is most important. And so sometimes, if I'm wearing my AAWS jersey with my name on the back, there have been times when the boards have not gotten along together. I served in 2010 on the first AA Grapevine, AA World Services task force to kind of bring us together. I served with 7 other people. And believe it or not, some people were against that. They didn't want the chair of the board to create that. But the concept talks about it. They may have to step in to mediate difficult situations. Ward did that back in 2010. He said, enough of this nonsense. I'm forming a committee with a couple of people who are not on the Grapevine and AWS board and a couple of people who are. And we're just going to lock ourselves in a room and we're going to work it out. The other exception, and to see that the service corporations operate within their budgets. So the trustees, finance, and budget committee has responsibility for reviewing the budgets that are approved for AA World Services and for AA Grapevine, and for every quarter reviewing those budgets and making sure. Again, during 2011 to 2014 or 13, the Grapevine had a big cash situation, and there was a special subcommittee formed for cash control to kind of get the Grapevine back on its feet. But the finance committee did that to so-called mediate a situation to try and help it. But those are very rare circumstances. At the end of the day, the General Service Board, the trustees, should be able to. Now, I'm not a big fan of the trust the process statement. Well, I believe it for what it really means. I don't like it when it's used to tell somebody they don't have a right to ask a question. It should never be used like that. The trust the process thing really comes from a Harvard Business Review article, which was really entitled Trust But Verify, right? There's nothing wrong with verify. Now, I will tell you one thing I've learned as a leader in AA and outside AA and nonprofit boards is it's a good reason to try to be honest with those who you report to, because if you break that trust, it is very hard to earn back. So reporting transparently and honestly and accurately is super important. But that is what custodial oversight is to allow those organizations to basically operate themselves. So I will go to questions on Tradition 8 and Concept 8. If you have any, please send them in via chat. I have one here. Bill W. was offered a job at Towns Hospital, but declined because of the group conscience. Why is it different today that it's okay for members of Alcoholics Anonymous to accept jobs at hospitals and treatment centers for alcoholism? Okay, let's talk about that. Great question, but it's a little bit unfair. Number one, there was no such thing as a certified alcoholism counselor in 1936, okay? You were either a doctor or a nurse. There was no such thing as what we used to call a CAC, a CACC, or whatever they call them. That's number one. Number two, AA just started. And, you know, Bill was motivated by money to do that. And they were trying to get AA off the ground. So there was other things to think about being distracted. Could you imagine today? I mean, let's just be fair. Could you imagine if your home group had a vote on your job? Like, we do everything equally and equitably. So would it only be people who work in treatment centers? Or if you got a job at the bakery down the street, should we have to vote on that? If you just got a part in a play on Broadway, should we have to vote on that? I think we have to be respectful. But it was just very different times. Let's see. What determines whether or not a particular intergroup pays any workers trusted servants? In my area, I'm not going to read the area number. There is no paid intergroup work that I am aware of. Okay, there's some areas, sections of the country, United States and Canada, that don't have a central office or intergroup. If you can run it by volunteers, that's awesome. But what does volunteer really mean? Volunteer means I get to say when I come, and I get to say when I leave. Some of you might be familiar with, in the outside world, the IRS has rules about whether you're a salaried employee or a consultant. You can't be a consultant if they tell you what time to show up. You've now become an employee. And, you know, volunteer trusted servants are great, but if you know that you need somebody in the office every day from 9 to 5, and they can't just decide to leave because they're a volunteer, well then, if you know you need 2 people, 2 part-timers, it's all about the circumstances of your individual intergroup. Let's see. What exactly does full stock ownership mean? Is it in the stock market? Great question. So forget about the stock market for a second. Let's just talk about a private company that's not publicly traded. When you incorporate, there's still shares of the company. There might be 10, there might be 100. There might be 3 or 4 people or 1 person who owns it. There's still shares, stock. Not stock like a stock market, but equity, that you own that. Prior to 1961, the owner of AA World Services and AA Grapevine was the General Service Board, Inc. That's who owned it. That's what full stock ownership meant. It's kind of like having subsidiaries. If you are a subsidiary and have a parent company, they have full stock ownership of you. That's a good way to look. The General Service Board is the spiritual parent company, the holding company of AA World Services and the AA Grapevine. And spiritually, the AA groups are the shareholders that own that holding company. Legally, the AA groups own nothing. The shareholders of the General Service Board are the 21 trustees. So that's what full stock ownership means. Let's see. Most corporations have folded their pension plans into 401ks, et cetera, due to the costs and liabilities of having one. Does AAWS, Grapevine, GSO still have pension plans? And if so, to your knowledge, has the topic ever come up? Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, I know way too much. I could give you a 6-week workshop on this topic. So, first of all, nonprofits are not eligible for 401ks. They use an instrument which is called a 403B. Up until January 1st or December 31st of 2013, the employees, remember, the General Service Board doesn't have employees that work for them, technically. If you're an employee, you either work for AA World Services or the AA Grapevine. The AA Grapevine and AA World Services had a retirement program, a traditional old style pension. Any employee hired up to January of December 31st of 2013 is in that old pension. It's funny to think, like, that's now 12 years ago. I got on the board when we were in the middle of doing all of this. So AA did, after the Pension Guarantee Act in 2009, we were underfunded millions of dollars in our pension. And we had to work very hard to rebuild it and to get it properly funded. And then we created a separate retirement program for employees hired after January 1st of 2013. And they're in a 403B where they get a set percentage given to them every year. And they can also save some of their own money. Now, some people ask, why didn't we just end the whole pension in 2013? So when it comes to pension conversion, there's a hard freeze, which means the pension's over, no more credit. Even if you already worked here, you're going to go into the 403B program, and your pension will only be calculated up till December 31st of 2013. Or there's a soft freeze. That's where all the employees who are already there stay in the old pension, and all the new employees go into the new system. We're AA, we're a spiritual organization. Yes, we have to be good business people, but when our employees went to work there, they were offered a pension. And we believe that's the ones that had that should have that until the day they leave. And that was the right AA thing to do. That's how we felt. Now, 12 years later, probably 50% or more of the staff are not in the old pension system now. They're all in the new. The unfunded pension liability, the unfunded pension liability was paid off in 5 years almost. Today, I recently read something from the General Service Board treasurer that actually thanked the board of back then when I was on it, because it was an out of control freight train, that pension. It was millions and millions underfunded. So yes, so that's the answer. Today we are 403B. We do have some employees who are in the old pension program. Let's see. How do I join the secret Facebook group for this group? That's fine. I'm sending you my email. in the chat, just send me an email. What determines whether or not a particular intergroup, that question was already asked. We have a recovery group, in quotes, made up of AA and NA members who recruit for their recovery program during some of their H&I commitments. Would tradition or 8 or 10 be considered? Well, first of all, there's no such thing as an H&I commitment from a combined AA, NA in either fellowship. And I have no problem telling you that when you go on an H&I commitment or a corrections commitment or a treatment commitment, you give up some of your individual liberty. If you want to be the biggest jerk in the world, you can go to any group you want, any meeting, because that's only your reputation. But if you are going into a facility representing Alcoholics Anonymous, then you're supposed to represent Alcoholics Anonymous, not any outside recovery organization, just Alcoholics Anonymous. Let me read this question before I decide if I'm going to read it. Okay, I'm going to read it. Can you share your opinion or thoughts on sponsees gifting sponsors with things, specifically things like gift cards or high-dollar gifts? Does this in any way constitute payment for 12-step work? So it's a fine line. If you have a long-term sponsor-sponsee relationship that has grown into a friendship, and you buy them a gift for their birthday or a holiday or whatever, who am I to say that's wrong? I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If you have a sponsor or a sponsee that's celebrating an anniversary, maybe, and you get them like maybe some spiritual book or AA history book, or maybe balloons and flowers or something like that, again, that sounds perfectly reasonable. If, on the other hand, you're expected to get your sponsor a $100 or $50 gift card to Applebee's or the Olive Garden or God knows where else, that's not AA. We don't pay for sponsorship. And any implication made to a newcomer or a sponsee that we do is not okay. We recently had a situation where I go to meetings 2 years ago where somebody was hearing fifth steps and they would make the person, it's a brilliant idea, by the way. We're not short on brilliant ideas as alcoholics, by the way. But this person would make the person buy a 3-day weekend down in the Keys at a luxury resort and listen to the fifth step down there. Yeah, we don't do that. That is just not what we do. It's for fun and for free. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous is, for fun and for free. Was there money stolen from AA? That's a question. I don't know what the person means by AA, if they mean GSO, if they mean AA in general. So here's what I'll tell you based on my experience with alcoholics. There was probably money stolen at the first AA meeting. That's based on my experience with alcoholics. Alcoholics steal. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent, but it happens. Where this becomes a tricky situation is the warranty tells us not to be punitive, but the big book tells us you might have to go to jail to make amends for a crime you committed. And I'm a person who believes the big book outweighs the service manual. There's nothing in there in the big book that says, except if you steal money from AA. Now, I'm not saying the person should be punished or anything, but the separate situation is for intergroups, AA World Services, AA Grapevine, General Service Board, even areas that incorporate and become nonprofit corporations. When you become a nonprofit corporation in any of the 50 states, the directors of that corporation have strict fiduciary responsibilities imposed by the Attorney General's office. Like, your job is to make sure that that money is managed. It doesn't matter if it's AA money. Your job is to make sure that that money is cared for safely. There is a Class A in another country many years ago who went to jail for stealing from their General Service Board. In our country, we have 50 states and a couple of territories. Canada has provinces, but some states say it's a requirement that if an officer of a nonprofit steals money, you have to report it. It's not up to you. Like, if somebody steals money from your group down the street, your group can decide whatever it wants to do. It's nobody else's business. But if you're in a state like Colorado or New Jersey or a couple of others, those states say, if you're a nonprofit corporation registered to do business in this state and an officer steals money, you have to report it to us. You see, people think that nonprofit, there's a trade-off. You don't get to be a nonprofit for free. It comes with a lot of strings attached. It comes with having minutes of your meetings. It comes with having an annual meeting. It comes with electing a treasurer and having real treasurer reports. They expect nonprofits to operate better than for-profit businesses. And as a result of you making that spiritual promise to operate in an ethical way, you don't have to pay taxes. Now, the penalty for losing your nonprofit status is swift and painful, for sure. In most places, it means paying retroactive taxes for a couple of years. In a lot of places, it means you'll never get your nonprofit status back again. If you, I just want to go to my file section a second in my phone, because if I do it on my iPad, I could disconnect you. But if I go to my AA and then AAWS and then New York State Attorney General's office, we have 3 New York corporations: General Service Board, Inc., AAWS, Inc., and AA Grapevine, Inc. These are publications from the New York Attorney General's office I'm going to read to you. The first one is called New York State Department of Law Charities Bureau. Responsibilities of Directors and Officers of Non-for-Profit Corporations. It's about 30 pages long. The second one, Financial Controls and Financial Accountability for Nonprofit Boards, New York State Office of the Attorney General Charities Bureau. Like, we don't just get to avoid responsibilities because we're AA. If we become a nonprofit, we have agreed to do a lot. Let's see, the 990, if you don't know what a 990 is, every nonprofit with, I want to say, revenues now over 5,000 a year has to file one. It says the 990 has questions relating to assets being misappropriated as well. Forget the term that is used. Yeah, you have to, if it asks you, have you had embezzlement or misappropriation? The 990 is a form so that the government knows that you're doing the right thing. Because when we take money on, we're making a spiritual promise with the people who give money to AA that we're not only going to use it for an AA purpose, but we're going to watch it and be careful. And if we become a nonprofit corporation, it's more than a spiritual obligation. It's a legal obligation that the directors of the board have. So that's it. Next week, we are on concept 9 and tradition 9. I thank everyone for being here. And remember, the week after that will be problems other than alcohol. So I'll close with the responsibility statement. I'm responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.